What's the deal with kilt pins? I've been looking for a nice kilt pin, and it seems that about 95% of the designs I find are swords or sword-based. Is there a traditional or historical reason for this? Why are kilt pins always sword-shaped? Always sword-shaped.
I would say is there a historical reason? Well, kind of, but not really. They kind of evolved over time. Some of the first kilt pins were, the story of the original kilt pin was Queen Victoria putting essentially like the oversized like safety pin or a diaper pin on on a blanket pin. Thank you. On somebody's kilt to keep it from flopping up when a guy was in formation. But there are historical. There's this pictorial evidence of, non-sword shaped, non-blanket pin type pins or brooches on kilts. I'd say usually they're, let's say cap badge, like 2-inch.
Similar in size to like a modern.
Yeah, modern cap badge, 2-inch size or less. I know there's a photo of the king having a kilt pin halfway up his kilt. So back then, there were different shapes. It wasn't always sword-based. Did you discover anything on when the sword shape started to come into effect?
I really get the impression that it's more of a 20th century thing. Another example or another style you see a lot in the 19th century to turn of the century period is things which are set with a lot of semi-precious stones. And very often they're in the shape of like a thistle or maybe a dirk. Basically some shape that it's still elongated, but it kind of emphasizes that it's a shape that works with the stones, because you can't make a sword that's made out of globules of stones, you know what I mean? But what seems to have happened is that you did want to have a shape that allowed you to have a nice long pin closure. So vertical was just more effective for that, more useful. And the only clue I have at the moment is that the sword thing came in because it was an easy design to create and became popular with makers in the early to mid 20th century because it was relatively easy to cast, assuming you're not setting stones in it. And
what guy doesn't like swords?
Exactly. It was an easy sell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say another, using the jewel thing, going back, something that just occurred to me is a lot of the original kilt pins were grouse feet. So you had the stone up top, and grouse foot on the bottom, kind of thing. So there are actually a lot of non-sword shaped pins. The diaper pin or the blanket pin is essentially sword shaped. It's tall and skinny, and that was kind of the OG pin to some degree. But nowadays, I think it's kind of. If you think about it through time, I think it's kind of having a bit of an hourglass moment where originally kilt pins were round as well as sword-shaped as well as grouse foot shaped because they were grouse feet, all kinds of different things, or just they're an embellishment on the lower front apron of the kilt. And then over, let's say, mid-1900s, they kind of like standardized for the most part on sword-shaped or a lot of the other stuff kind of went away. They mostly went to sword shaped. But now in the Renaissance or the whatever, the
you can say Renaissance.
Yeah, Renaissance.
I like Renaissance. Yeah.
Sure. The Renaissance of kilts that we're kind of experiencing now from the mid 1990s through the 2020s. I'd say there's a lot more shapes other than just sword. Those are still bog standard popular shapes, but you're starting to see some people do, their own brooches that mean something to them as their kilt pin. We've designed a bunch of pins that have, the Fenrir kilt pin that we have. We have a whole zoomorphic thing that we're trying to play around with. Spoilers. We have the guys from the Book of Kells. It's not swords; they're carrying
the
weapons,
warrior guys.
Yeah, warrior guys. There's a lot of pins that aren't necessarily sword, but that is still probably the most popular. But as you get into nerd culture, so to speak, and guys want to add their own little flair, their own little embellishment in the jewelry that you put on the kilt, I'd say that's one place where it's kind of, in my estimation, a little bit more understandable, acceptable, if you will, to play around with it because it's just a bit of bling for the front of your kilt.
Yeah, I kind of want to blame the hire industry. I want to say that like when people started renting kilts for weddings, somebody thought, okay, you got to have a kilt pin. What can we do that we can have bajillions of them sitting in a bin back at the shop? And sword was easy.
Yep.
You know?
There's that too. When in doubt, blame the hire industry. That's fair.
I know I do.
Indeed.
But that's that. I think basically, if you think most of what you're seeing is sword shaped, look a little harder. I mean, there are makers out there like ourselves who are doing a lot of different designs. I think you find something that is much more meaningful. And you can also hunt for vintage ones and look for some of those inset stone designs I was talking about. Some of those are gorgeous. They're not cheap, but they are amazing.
Yeah, especially when they're silver or precious metal.
And they
versus
almost
just
always
pewter.
are silver.
Yeah. Cool. Hope that helps.
Hey, thank you for watching. In case you didn't catch it somehow, we do have a retail space, usakilts.com. Do me a favor, head over there and find all the Highland gear that appeals to you and maybe buy something.